Welcome, everyone, to the India International Group of the Fulbright Alumni Association, also known as FIIG or FIG, FIG's 2025 Film Festival. I am delighted to see all of you. I am the president of FIG, and like at all our events and programs, this festival is a space for connecting, a venue for collaborating, and a platform for our members to showcase their work. This festival exemplifies the board's objective to make the India Interest Group a virtual home for its members. The idea was born when one of our members, Carlin Davis, reached out, and we began to explore ways to share her work. 8 months, many WhatsApp conversations, and a few Zoom calls later, we have our first film festival. We hope you enjoyed watching the carefully curated selection of films and are very glad you are here to participate in the discussion with the panelists. We wanted to maximize your time with our talented panelists, so there won't be any visuals during the discussion. I will introduce the moderators, and they will introduce you to the panelists as they dive into the discussions. Before I hand over this, I will say a few quick thank yous. My deepest gratitude to the planning committee. Sorry, I'm going to start my slideshow. Um, Sorry, I need to figure out how to do this. Give me 1 second, and I will share this. Uh, Go. All right. So, um, my my deepest gratitude to the planning committee and John Borston, who joined us as a juror. Because of their unwavering commitment and professionalism, each detail was carefully thought out and implemented. Thank you, Corlin and Jeff. My deepest gratitude to our donors. Your generosity has funded this festival, and made future programs possible. This is a valuable gift to the entire community in today's uncertain times. Thank you also to the FIG Board of Directors for their support and counsel throughout the planning and implementation of the festival. Special thanks to our marketing team, led by board member Nija Vashist, who was diligent about the social media posts despite a severe hand injury and a very tight lab schedule. To Alexa Bernstein, a community member who helped get the emails out on schedule, and a very talented graphic designer, Divya Iyer Singh, who makes all our flyers. Many thanks to all the university departments who helped to spread the word, to Munir Saig and Sophia Gillespie of the Fulbright Association's national office, who were instrumental in helping us iron out technical challenges along the way. And thank you, Diana Marshall, for being my tech savior for today's event. I hope this festival will be a memorable experience for all of you. The moderator for our first panel is Harjan Gill. Harjan is a professor of Harjan is a professor of anthropology at Towson University. His research examines the intersections of gender, sexuality, transnationality, and popular culture in India. He is also an award-winning filmmaker and has made several ethnographic films that have screened at international film festivals and on television channels worldwide, including BBC World News, Doordarshan, which is Indian national TV, and on PBS. His films include Roots of Love, Mardistan, which means Macho Land, and Sent Away Boys. All his films are available on video and YouTube and have open access. A Fulbright Nehru Research Fellowship grantee, he has also received numerous other awards, scholarships, and grants. During his Fulbright, he was developing an 8-part immersive virtual reality film series on Indian masculinities. He is the current president of the Society for Visual Anthropology, SVA, and I am looking forward to his forthcoming book, Coming of Age in Macho Land: Masculinity, Sexuality, and transnationality in post-conflict Punjab. Arjun, it's yours.
Thank you, Mrinalini, sorry, and all of our panelists today and the filmmakers who've joined us. Um, I want to just take a moment to introduce the three filmmakers, and I have a couple of questions and to get us started, and then we'll maybe open it up to the audience or the folks who are joining us from all over the world to get their questions. And hopefully we'll have a kind of a very casual, intimate conversation about these three wonderful films that exemplify this notion of community. And so with that, let me first introduce Miriam Manacheri. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Please feel free to correct me. Who's the director of The Leopard's Tribe. Miriam is an award-winning filmmaker in Mumbai. She's very prolific. She's made a lot of films, and she's the founder of Filament Pictures. And she's currently a visiting scholar at UT Austin on a Fulbright exchange program. Am I correct? You're in UT Austin currently. So thank you for joining us. Her film, Leopard's Tribe, is actually a film that's a short documentary that's set in Mumbai, just in the RA Dairy area, which is sort of, I'm trying to think of the geography, northern Mumbai, close to where the film city is. And I've actually been there. And the film itself looks at the tensions between this greenbelt forested area that has one of the largest population of leopards in this region. And, would be surprised to know that Mumbai actually has a lot of wildlife, and the pressures of development as the government is trying to uh, encroach on some of the forested areas to be able to develop the new metro and urbanization, and the sort of struggles between, I think, the community of indigenous or Adivasis who live in this particular RA Dairy area, and the connection with the forest or the woodlands, and their relationship with the leopards, and how the deforestation of loss of habitat then leads to these sort of tense encounters with these magnificent, beautiful, animals that need to be protected. And it's so much just more than about, the sort of human animal encounter. It's more about deforestation. It's about climate change. And we'll talk more about that. And it's also about art and preserving community and community activism. So we will get into all of it. I just wanted to briefly mention what the film's about. Our next presenter, or actually our next panelist, is Manjula Bharati, who is a professor of urban policy and governance at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, also in Mumbai. And she is the dean of the School of Habitat Studies there. And Manjula's film, Climate Resilience, is a film that's set in the southern India, in Kerala, among I want to get the name right, Kudumbashri community. And this is a community of indigenous Adivasi folks who are confronting climate change and rising tides and waters because of climate change, and sort of struggling to protect their communities. And many of these communities are small communities who are involved in fishing and agriculture, and also simultaneously dealing with this rapid shift in global climate change. And I think what the film does really well is shows you how these global forces have this very localized impact, right? And how communities coalesce in many ways, these Dalit communities, socially vulnerable communities, and fight for climate justice, right? And so we're going to get more into that film as well. It's a beautiful film. It's a really powerful film. It's a very inspiring film in many ways. Our last panelist is Coraline Davis. I apologize, I mispronounced her name earlier. Um, uh, uh, Coralyn is a professor of gender and women's studies at Bucknell University in Pennsylvania. And her last Fulbright was in India in 2016, 2017. And she's the producer and I'd say also person who conceived the project Sama in the Forest, the main ethnographer who sort of imagined this project, this film, documentary film. And the film is actually set in Bihar, among the Mithila community. And the film is about folklore. It's a documentary about folklore. It features the Madhubani artist and the way in which they talk about their own lives through this, this art form, and how folklore becomes a way to kind of engage with local issues and kind of communal issues of patriarchy and family pressures to marry. And the film does this very beautifully by incorporating, I think, elements of ethnofiction, and reenactment as a way of telling the story. And I have actually seen this film twice before, and I'm still happy to be able to talk about it again here because we screened it at the Society for Visual Anthropology Film Festival last year, where it won the Best Feature Award. So congratulations. I'm so happy to see it here as well. It's a beautiful film. It's a film about art. It's a film about storytelling. It's a film about kind of indigenous feminism, forms of feminisms in many ways, how people confront these pressures of patriarchy and issues of like familial honor by reincorporating these kind of folkloric stories about Krishna and his daughter and the brother who's this incredibly amazing brother, very progressive figure in the story. So we will talk more about that as well. I just want to welcome all three panelists. Thank you for sharing your work with us, first of all, and thank you for making the time to be here. I think I want to open up with the question, if each one of you can talk about what led you to tell this particular story, because all these stories in many ways are about communities. And I think one thread that runs throughout all these stories is the way in which you chose to collaborate with each filmmaker chose to collaborate with the community as opposed to making a film about this particular community, right? Each film has this sense of that these three films were a very collaborative effort. They were a very collaborative project. They give you a sense that I imagine you spend a lot of time there and encourage people to think about how to tell their own story, empower them in many cases by providing them with cameras to be able to document their lives and the issues that they're confronting. And so if you could talk a little bit about what that process of building community relationships was like, and at what point you decided, the film is the best kind of outcome of that, or the outgrowth of that, or this is the way in which I want to tell this particular story in relationship or in collaboration with the communities in which you worked for this particular film. And also how perhaps also connecting it to the Fulbright, how the Fulbright Fellowship might have played a role into it. Maybe it was before you started your Fulbright Fellowship, but if this was in fact a Fulbright project, if you could talk a little bit about that. So maybe we can start with Miriam.
Thank you so much, Arjun. That was a great introduction. And the film started for me really because I live in high-rise apartments in Mumbai, which is the commercial capital of India. And I live on the 10th floor, and we have, it's a whole residential complex, and we do have leopards visit us from time to time. And the kind of fear that it instills, in the neighborhood, as a mom myself, about sending your child out, when in fact I got a call saying that the leopard had been trapped. And at 5 in the morning, I go down and there's a huge crowd over there. And I see this majestic beast in a cage. And that is a image and a metaphor that remained in my mind. I had studied biology before I did filmmaking, and was all set to be a conservationist. So it begged the question, where does the forest end and where does the city begin? And that's, I think, something that was in my subconscious. And, just before the pandemic, we had these huge outbreak of protests because more than 2,000 trees were to be felled in RA. And when I had begun my career as a journalist before I became a filmmaker, so I read like the papers really diligently, and I kept seeing the face of the protests were actually this one indigenous family who were giving these sort of statements. It made me curious enough to kind of go down to where they lived within RA, which is the outskirts of the forest in Mumbai. And I was actually completely taken aback by what I saw, because here was a way of life completely contrasting to what we have, just maybe a few kilometers away. Here were like a 10,000 strong community who live with, in complete harmony with their surroundings. They had the stories of their life on the walls. There, I would completely see these repeated motifs of the leopard, who was not just a deity, but a daily friend. And a way of life that is about coexistence. And I felt that that was a very important sort of entry point and point of view to tell a story which is opposite to my own experience of living in the city and living sort of in harmony with not just the living beings around, but have this sort of very deep-rooted understanding of sustainable sort of solutions for a city. The fact that it was happening and unfolding in the pandemic, I think gave it a extra layering and a lens, because here was a time that the city was willing to spend millions on like an oxygen cylinder, which was in short supply. But in a blink of an eye, you could fell down 2,000 trees, which Boyd tells me that's as good as an oxygen factory. In terms of collaboration, very quickly, I mean, I knew I would want to film with this family. I just started spending time. It was filming during the pandemic, so there were severe lockdown restrictions in terms of movement, in terms of actually reaching there with a crew. So I think, although I have taken a collaborative approach with all my films, I would mark this film personally for me as one that went one step further in terms of collaborative filmmaking, because the youngest son, who is Akash Boyd, was always curious about the camera, and he kept kind of peering over our shoulders, asking questions, and he's artistic, as you see in the film. So my camera person actually started showing him how to use the camera, and I would say the wedding scene in the film is actually something that we couldn't reach in time, and there were lockdown restrictions, and Akash filmed the entire wedding scene for us, and he shows up at all our screenings as a member of our crew. And I think it was sort of something that is very special to me, that I learned as well in terms of collaborative filmmaking. The other reason that this film I see as very collaborative is that the peak of the protests happened before I started filming, and there were severe restrictions. The police were cracking down and actually checking what people had on their phones, etc. So I needed to recreate that, which was the trigger point, the actual protest that broke down. And so we put out a call for anyone who had filmed at that time, and people came forward with their phone footage, which was the rare sort of archives that we were able to tap in and kind of reconstruct the story through that. So I really see this film as belonging to a lot of people, even though maybe I drove the story.
Manjula, if you want to talk a little bit about your film. I also want to, I failed to mention that I think what is really beautiful about your film is the ways in which the activists use community mapping and community theater as a way to tell their stories, right? And another kind of thread that runs throughout all three of these films is this kind of indigenous or even indigenous community-based art practice and how important it is to our lives, and that's something that we don't think so much about in this day and age of like streaming and technology and and WhatsApp and TikToks and Instagrams. But there's something really powerful about being able to create your own artistic expression of your lives. And I think your film captures that very beautifully. So if you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Thank you, Harjit. See the movie that the documentary, that community resilience, life is told by women, is actually coming from the Alumni Engagement Innovation Fund of Fulbright. So then it was funded by them, and then we three Fulbrighters joined together because there was an issue of a climate crisis in the central part of Kerala, that is the Kochi place, and that is the high tide affected area. And it is not the Adivasi community, but it is the coastal community. So the coastal community has been affected, and earlier the occurrence of the high tide was once in a year, but now it is 24/7, where all the houses has been deep filled with water, and how the life and the livelihood of the coastal community has been affected. And that time, what is the discourse of climate change that is happening at the global level? And we can see that there is a paradigmatic shift in the understanding of the community involvement in the climate discourse has happened with IPCC Report 6, which started bringing about the importance of social vulnerability into the climate discourse. So till then, the climate discourse was considered as a technocratic, scientific, top-down approach, from that patriarchal approach. So now, with the social vulnerability started coming in, then the situated knowledge of the people started becoming important. The moment the situated knowledge becomes important, the lived experiences become important. And the space started becoming like Lefebvre was saying about, it's the lived spaces, or you can say about a third space that is coming out, or the hybrid space that is coming out, So the transcendental ways in which the space started coming in, and how the lived experiences and the situated knowledge of the people started becoming the new data. And then that we are trying to capture that data. And through that data, when your data is different, then you are trying to have reframing the methodology that is to understand the climate discourse. When the methodology is different, then the epistemology, the body of knowledge that you're trying to understand, and the climate discourse started changing. And so the epistemological discourse started changing. And the moment the epistemological discourse started changing, then the very epistemology, because there is an epistemic violence when the climate change is affecting my day-to-day life, and in a place of a right to information or a right-based discourse of development is the part of the society, then the most and the first affected people are never into the voice, their voices are never been heard. So how can we have this IPCC Report 6, that is a global discourses of bringing the social vulnerability? And through that, how can we change the data imagination? And through the data imagination, reframing the methodology and reframing the methodology to the epistemology, and thereby actually repositioning the politics of the marginal itself in the climate change discourses with a gender perspective, something that we are trying to see. So for that, we try to bring in the perspective of a artist, activist, and academicians. So AAA coming together, how it is important to have the artist into the picture, how it is important to bring the activist spaces into the picture, and how it is important to bring in the academics, So then thereby bringing a local narrative to the climate discourses with a gender lens. That is what we have done. So we have brought in the gender counter map to the climate change discourses. So the gender counter map or the community counter map started coming in through three forms. That is, one is the community mapping of the areas, because the area has been affected by the tidal wave and tidal flooding. And what is the map, that is the physical map that is available, is given by the planners, the bureaucrats, or the technocrats, or the scientists. But now that place is no more the places, because most of the bridges has been washed away, their sanitation facilities has been taken, their roads has been completely broken, and the bridges has been washed away. So now the people who are living that spaces, we have trained them through the participatory resource mapping. We have trained them for 6 months. So it is train them, the community group that you were saying about the Kudumbasri, that is the largest community-based organization in the world with 43 million Kudumbasri members there in that Kerala. So we have trained the group that is living in that spaces to make that historical mapping, participatory resource mapping, co-op analysis. We have trained them how to make the mapping. So that becomes a bottom-up approach of making. So we have deconstructed the spatial understanding, spatial data, historical data. So counter spatial data, counter historical data by training the community to do that. And second one was the community video. So we have trained them to make 2 to 3 minutes video to as a subaltern visual scapes, to the popular narratives that is coming up. So these women, we have trained them to make 2 to 3 minutes video to make small videos of their surroundings. That makes you're changing, you're questioning the visual scapes. So thereby, you're also bringing a new empirical evidences to their situated knowledge. And the third one was the theater. So we have trained them again with the School of Drama director to make the community theater, where they started saying about their experiences and how it is important to bring that. So from a class consciousness to a social consciousness, to a hegemony consciousness, to a counter hegemony consciousness. How can we bring that, to make them to claim their space and the voice is something that we have done. And that is what we are calling it, basically a governmentality, how our mentality is being governed by certain sets. And we are trying to bring a counter hegemonization through changing that governmentality of the community and community co-producing and making the data in which they live. So that is something that we have done. You are muted, Harjit. You're muted.
Sorry, I always often forget to unmute myself. Thank you so much. It's a beautiful film and an incredible accomplishment. Corlin, did you want to talk about your process of how you found yourself in to the Jivaki Art Collective in Bihar? So you could tell us a little bit more about that process.
Yes, thank you very much. It's really an honor to be with the three of you filmmakers. I really appreciate all of your films, including Harjit's, who wasn't a part of this grouping, but it's really great to see you again, Harjit, and thanks to everybody for being here. So I started doing ethnographic research as an anthropologist in Nepal in the 1990s, early mid 1990s, and I was working in the eastern Terai of Nepal, which is the area that where the international border, just right across the border, is the Mithila area of Bihar in India. It's very close. So really, I've been working in the same cultural and linguistic region for since that period. And very early on, my research was not originally about storytelling, but it became about storytelling very quickly as I realized that many women had a pretty large repertoire of oral stories that are collective, and in the West we usually call folklore. And because women's public voice and even private voice in the context of being surrounded by elders and in-laws and such was very small, I found these stories a way to really begin to understand women's differently positioned perspectives and cosmologies and orientations to their everyday lives and ritual lives. So I got interested in storytelling quite early. And then I got an invitation by some folks I knew who were connected with the Mithila Art Institute in Madhubani to come to India and use sort of make that institute a kind of a hub for some ongoing research on women's storytelling there, and to begin to incorporate in a more serious way both painting and ritual into the kind of analysis I was doing of women's expressive forms. For many years, I operated as an academic anthropologist in a very standard way, in that I was doing, quote unquote, solo research and publishing exclusively in academic venues. And I was sort of done with that at this point, and not done, but really wanted to kind of reorient myself to creating forms that were more accessible to wider audiences, and also importantly of use to folks in the communities where I'd been working for a long time. So that's where the idea of a film and a participatory film and a collaborative form to boot came to mind. So on the first Fulbright I have had in India in 2016-17 was the period where I came with a filmmaker named Carlos Gomez, who does participatory, community-oriented kind of storytelling sorts of hybrid documentary films. He's done in several parts of the world. He is originally from Colombia, and his early films and some of his current films have to do with Colombia as well, but he's really spread out in his work since then, but it continues to be in this mode of communities telling their own stories. And so we were a pretty good pair in that regard. And the third key member really of our original collaboration is named Suma Jha, and she's, her Nanigar is in Mithila and in Madhuvani. And so she had a connection there, even though she was living in Delhi. And she and I just connected online a couple of years before my Fulbright, and started to do some work together. And then we were all three of us in the field together as we began the filming. And our commitment at the time was not just to a collaboration amongst ourselves, three people who are very different in many different ways, but also to try to create a context in which a diversity of local voices would come forward, and importantly, where although in some ways the film is about social change, particularly around gender issues, to me it was very important that at the heart of this was that people already had their own cultural resources to use to think about change, to inspire change, and did not, need to look to the outside for that. And I find women's stories to be a place where there is all kinds of inspiration for thinking through contemporary lives. And so ultimately we chose this one particular festival tale, Sama Chakeva, to be the central thread in the film. And it is told through multiple women telling the story of Sama as an oral tale, each of them a little differently, which is an important part of the picture. And footage of the festival where people are playing with the characters that become figurines that are in the story. And it's a very kind of raucous, girls and women only festival that happens at night with fire and a variety of songs, some of which are very bawdy and enable the women and girls to speak in ways and from perspectives that in everyday lives they don't get to, including really critiquing some of the oppressions in their society, and then also using the painting to help tell the story, and all of that is kind of part of the frame that is also made by each of these participants talking to us about their thinking about gender norms and some of the key shifts going on in society in terms of girls' lives in particular, education, work, mobility, mobile phones, that sort of thing. And then the group decided to do an enactment of the story, which is not normally done. And so they took on characters and figured out what the scenes would be. And we did this all through workshopping. And they decided how they wanted to tell the story in a kind of a dramatization or enactment. And that we filmed that, and that became part of the material in the film as well. So that's all interwoven together in the film, which covers the relationship between father and son, father and daughter, husband and wife, lovers, or kind of cross-gender relationship, and the role of the gods in intervening in life, the important role, as Harjant pointed out, of the brother who supports his sister and what she's doing, which is really going out of bounds of society.
It's a
So
very
it's deeply collaborative and deeply participatory, and it was really fun to operate in that mode.
Yeah, I found the story of Sama to be a very subversive story, right, to the patriarchal family, and the ways in which, when we think about, the ways in which society, particularly in patriarchal cultures, women's sexualities are policed through rumor, right, and the way in which, and then sort of to talk about and denounce this chugli and the character of Chugla who does the chugli, who's engaging in this rumor, which is often a means of kind of controlling women's sexuality, right, in society, was really powerful and subversive. And I thought that was really incredible. And that's actually a point that I wanted to also make about all three of these films. What's really incredible is that these are films about political movements. These are films about, empowerment. These are films about, self-empowerment in many cases, rejecting certain patriarchal norms. But what's amazing that comes across in all three of these films is the way in which women in the families and society and communities are the ones who are taking the lead in sort of taking these movements forward, right? The family who's living in the forest, in the Leopard's tribe, it's the matriarchal figure who's so proud of the fact that she's been arrested, right? I love that moment when she's like, "Oh yeah, I got arrested," and she's so proud of it. And there's like a picture of her you can tell that if she wasn't there, it wouldn't have that same that story wouldn't have that necessarily the same energy, or that movement would not have that same energy, right? Even in Manjula's film, it's really the women who are at the forefront of leading these kind of political movements, for self-reliance, for climate justice, for advocating for equal rights. So if you could talk a little bit about, was that a conscious choice to foreground women within your, particularly the sort of the matriarchal figures within your stories? I think, Miriam, if you can talk a little bit about that, maybe Manjula, if you can talk a little bit about that, I'd really appreciate that, because I thought that was really powerful, and we think about Indian society as this kind of very patriarchal society, but actually it's not. There's, women have a lot of power and agency, and they're very resilient, right? And they'll keep showing up even when like the government changes and you feel like you're at ground zero. They're the ones like, "Oh no, we'll go out there and fight again. Like we'll keep going." I would have given up and just be like, "Okay, I can't do this anymore." So, Miriam, if you want to talk about
Thank
that.
you for asking that question, Harjant. It's especially for me in this film. So like I said, I was following the movement, and actually it was the patriarch Boyd who was giving all the interviews. But as a filmmaker, I also go with a lot of like instinct. And being on the field when I was, Boyer would give me the perfect sort of political bite, sound bite. So as a filmmaker, that worked, but you're looking for something more. And Premila Boyer, on the other hand, her language was just completely in harmony with her surroundings. The way she would point a bird outside her window, or she would offer that I would rather keep the leopard and give away my dog. She was the unscripted that you're looking for. The way she would climb a tree was an act in itself. And instinctively, I started following her. And that instinct is right, because like you rightly put it, women are at the center of conservation stories simply because they are so rooted to their surroundings. And Prakash Boyer, even though he was kind of giving the political statements, he is going out into the city to earn his living. And it's Premila who is like the stakeholder of that actual connection to her surroundings. And the fact that does not come out in the film, sometimes some facts we keep away because you're also protecting the people within the film, is that Prakash Boyer actually works for the municipal corporation, who is responsible for the felling of trees. So he is in some sense working for the party that he philosophically is against, and in that sense, Premila Boyer actually wears that political mantle and steps forward and says, the battle that he cannot fight, I will fight in the foreground, and that's why she's so proud of having, she was actually conflicted when she was arrested, because without her, her whole family kind of falls apart. She's the person kind of keeping it together. But having done that, she understands the role she's playing for her community in, in preserving the battle, in kind of stepping into the front line. And in fact, I'm a filmmaker primarily, and I see that my films move into academic circles and also have its broadcast version. So we did a broadcast version for BBC, and in that it's called the Tigress of Mumbai, and it is about Premila Boyer. So we had a shorter version. It went in Marathi, and like the local community started referring to her by that name, which gives her an immense sort of sense of claiming that history of the conservation story. And if you see, even within the film, you have elements in the visual language of hugging the trees, which is the Chipko movement, really, which was pioneered again by women, and have that language of preservation is something that is carried forward in movements, 40 years down the line. There are still women hugging the trees, and that is a very powerful language of, a matriarchal narrative, I would say. And again, Adivasi communities do have matriarchal sort of structures around their society, which is again very interesting.
Yeah, no, and you captured that very beautifully. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Manjula.
Yeah, I would like to agree with the two panel members saying about the importance of women. But unfortunately, what we see is that despite the women coming into this environmental movement, when the official spaces and the policy making is happening, especially in the UNFCCC, is coming out, like the place and the positionality of the women is very, very minimal. So even after the Beijing conference, UNFCCC is coming out without even a single word of women in their policy analysis. So then there is a lot of women's movement, and now they started changing that, climate change. So our intention is basically to bring in the importance of women, why gender matters in climate change discourses, and through their everyday life, how it is important to bring that, the nexus between the gender and the climate change, and to see beyond the dyadic relationship between gender and climate change, because climate change is a poly crisis. So how it is important to look at from an economic, cultural, political. So from that perspective, the empowerment could be a politically problematic concept. How, like we are using the terms here, because we need to be very, very careful of, how to use it, especially in that context, because we have the national climate change policies coming up and the state climate policies coming up, and where the minimal role of the women are there. So how to, basically, when we are looking at it, it is important to decolonize the data. So which is very important. And also then when you're trying to decolonize the data, what we are also trying to question the epistemic violence, because the knowledge has been produced by the technocrats, and it's very important that it is considered that knowledge is produced by the white able bodied men. So it is important to bring that, to support this knowledge production, the epistemic violence that is happening, and then from the community and from the women who are on the margins, who are on the fringes, and how their everyday life, day-to-day life is important in making this kind of, and thereby bringing a subaltern knowledge and a subaltern consciousness to the climate change discourses, where women being one of the important factors, because they're always been pushed to the periphery. So we are trying to bring that periphery to the center by deconstructing. So we are saying that if gender is a social construct, then we also need to deconstruct it, right? So how can we deconstruct it in the climate change discourses? Then that needs to the discourse of a gender just transition. So because everywhere we are speaking about the just transitions. The climate change is bringing about the structural changes, in the life and livelihood. Now they're saying about the carbon neutral economy. Then what is important, the coal mines in India is started shutting down. When the coal mines is started shutting down, there are because we have been to Jharkhand now. And so there are thousands of people who their livelihood are dependent on the coal mine. So what is happening when there is a changes in the structures of the economy and how the people who are dependent on that has been changed? Is the transition a just transition? And is the transition a gender just transition in the climate change thing? So what to make that, how can we give the voices and claim that voices of the periphery and the community? So how then we are using these questions of, this whole question of governmentality, how the mentality of the bureaucrats, how the mentality of the politicians, how the mentality of the policymakers, how the mentality of the elected representatives, how the mentality of the women themselves is being governed by this patriarchal structure, and how can we counter hegemonize that, So we are looking at this whole question of, there is a hegemony of absence. So how can we counter hegemonize through the politics of presence of women there? So I would like to say one small example, like for example, when we are sitting there. So one of the time when we are asking the women to draw the pictures which is familiar to them, then they all started making the pictures of men. So I asked the question, why are you drawing? So one of the women who is 70 got up and said, I am 70-year-old and I entered the kitchen at the age of 10, started cooking for my father. I got married at the age of 18. I started cooking for my husband. And then I have a son. I started cooking for my son. Then my daughter got married and I'm now living with my daughter. And then I started cooking for my son-in-law. And I've got a grandson now who is 10 years old. And I'm started cooking for my grandson. So she said, I don't know the order and the color of my tongue. So the internalization of this invisibility to the patriarchal structure, how can we counter hegemonize?
Yeah, absolutely.
Through claiming that, So that is what this whole thing that we are trying to look at, So we have made a small group like We Can, Women in Climate Action Network.
Yeah.
But we are actually looking for some kind of funds, because we have made it through our personal contributions to the other contribution. But this is something very, very important that the women need to take. They are very enthusiastic now because their voices has been heard. And the planners are now taking the state plan for the first time is mentioning about thing which is not being mentioned about it, because the high tide is not being considered as a climate disaster. Now the state government started looking at it as a disaster because of this, our intervention. And the women started feeling very enthused about they are getting their voices and roles. The district panchayat is earmarking 2 crore in their panchayat fund for that. So we are able to make small inroads, but then we also need to make it sustainable. For that, some kind of climate finance is also important. So we are also looking for some kind of funds to make this group that is active to make their intervention more sustainable.
Yeah, and also just adding to that, I mean, I was just thinking about the farmers' protest movement in northern India and the ways in which, women were very much a huge part of that, even though women in agricultural economies or in sort of agrarian economies are their labor is not even recognized, right? Like many of them don't even get to inherit the land in Punjab, and it's the men who are sort of seen as the farmers, and actually it's the women who are sort of were at the forefront of that movement. They're the ones who are doing the labor in the fields, like many of them, at least in Punjab, they're all abroad working, and women are the ones who are taking care of land. Corlin, I want to actually ask you kind of a slightly different question about gender in your film, because what's really powerful, it is a feminist story, and I appreciate all the perspectives of the different women from different generations sharing, but you also talk to a lot of men about Sama's story. And you feature men who have a kind of very feminist disposition, and then the other men who are sort of like, no, 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 this is just a story. I don't engage in folklore, folk stories anymore. So if you could talk about the kind of choice to also include men in this, and also, having somebody like Carlos, a male-bodied filmmaker, come into this sort of what is otherwise a kind of more female-coded space to make this film. How did that kind of change the dynamic of working on this project?
Those are really wonderful questions. So we absolutely wanted to include and hear from men in the film, and more generally. There we tried to include a real diversity of men in terms of just life trajectory, age, caste, and academic status, and I think we accomplished that in a few ways. But I have to say that ultimately the men who were in the film are, they self-selected. They wanted to be part of it, so there were some young men who, were kind of more highly educated and more familiar with, and had absorbed more kind of discourses of modernity and gender and stuff like that, and there were some older men who also were very serious about what they were doing in terms of trying to create more gender equality, I would say, was the frame around education and public voice. But it was really mixed, and we wanted to sort of see, like all of us, people were self-contradictory also. And one of my favorite things that's in the film is the man who played Lord Krishna in the film, who was also an artist and Dalit in caste identity. He said that he and other men in his family didn't want the women to play Sama Chakeva, to do the festival, because it's at night and it's dangerous, women outside, it's dark, etc. But then when his grandmother corrected him and told him that actually this festival is for you, for the long life of sons and husbands, and then he saw the light. But this is the same, so that's kind of fascinating, right? Because there's the elderness of the woman who impacted him, right? She's his senior and a very important family member. And on the other hand, it was the conviction that actually this is good for men, not just fun for women, that made it okay. But, so she's being very strategic, the grandmother, right? And but this is the same man who also says in his interview, at the time he had one daughter, and she's in his lap and clearly very, very precious to him. And he's talking about how daughters, he's investing in his daughter like he would a son, and that she will represent the family it's not just this kind of patrilineal idea, but the idea that the daughter is sort of the family, even as she moves through her life and becomes an adult, rather than the kind of age-old narrative of the daughter, when she marries, she becomes part of somebody else's family, so why invest in her? And so it's very complex, I think, and we very purposefully in the film tried to not have a party line, try to enable voices to be complicated, individuals to be complicated, and to show the dissensus, right, rather than the consensus in the community. In part for that reason, it was really important to have men in the film. There was another person who we originally thought was going to play Sam, in the brother in the enactment of the story, and he ended up moving for a job in the middle of it, so he couldn't do it. But we have this great interview footage of him talking about the importance of brothers today in today's society, that things aren't going to change unless our brothers support the rights of their sisters, metaphorically, and it was just like he was saying these yummy things. But we couldn't have him in the film because he left, so we couldn't carry the character through the film. So that's part of what you asked. Now I can't remember what else you asked.
No, I appreciate that. And I do recognize that we don't have that much more time left. So I gave the opportunity, because I can ask many questions about all three of these wonderful films, because I love them so much. But I do want to allow our audience members or folks who are joining us to ask questions. So whoever would like to go, maybe unmute yourself and turn on your camera so we can see your beautiful face. Lauren, go ahead.
Yes, I have to be audio only. My Fulbright was 1968-69. When I went there, we were 21 folks. We went up to Kashmir straight away, spent 3 weeks up there doing orientation. Then we got assigned to colleges around the country. We didn't go there knowing where we would be assigned. So I was at the University of Calcutta, the Ramakrishna Mission College, which is along the Hooghly River, quarter of a mile away. And it's an ashram, and it's got 2 private schools for the well-to-do. It's got a college for the well-to-do of the villages and towns, not the city. And then it had an academy for the blind, and it had an experimental farm. How's that for being 21 years old, trying to figure out what India is all about? Now here we are in 2025. I want to pay a compliment to the film producers, makers, just brilliant, okay? Your cinematography as well as your stories and your characters. And I would have at least a dozen questions because I am an attorney and I won't practice law with you today, but I'm going to ask a practical question about the productions first and then ask you about how many times to watch the film intellectually and aesthetically. So the production question for each of you, if you could briefly, when did you conceive it? How did you put together the support? How did you do the casting? Don't give a long answer, try to make it succinct. And just the credits at the end, I would look at them very closely. So what you could each comment on, I'll appreciate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So anyone wants to, we can go in order, Miriam, if you want to start, and then we can go to Manjula and Corlin after.
Yeah, so being a documentary filmmaker for more than 20 years, thank you, Lauren, for asking. My instinct is always I have a development phase where I begin shooting on my own time and whatever resources that I can sort of drum up. But over time, especially because this film was shot over 2 years, we do need, outside support to continue filming. I like to pay my crew and for technical equipment so that it's finally broadcast quality, because it's important to me that these films go out to the widest possible audience. So yeah, I started pitching the film, and being in also a journalist first, I started pitching it within journalism forums. So there was a forum in London called One World Media. So over there, I met several broadcasters who were interested in the film. I already had what do I say, a sort of glimpse into the film because I had a proof of concept. So they weren't like kind of buying in blindly. But so I began talks with two, three broadcasters, and finally it was BBC roughly when I was at the like I would say a rough cut stage that they felt that they could carry on their broadcast network a shorter version. So with BBC's, financing the film and my own funds and roping in another co-producer, I kind of negotiated that I would have a longer version, which is like the 40-minute version, which is the director's cut that would travel into film festivals. It's the version that I like most, ones that I have shown during my Fulbright currently across universities, and I feel it has a very strong connect, whether I'm showing it in an engineering department or whether I'm showing it in a film department or whether I'm showing it in gender studies, it's able to make that connection. So I negotiated that I have this longer version that travels, and the shorter version went on BBC in multiple languages, and yeah, that's the way I went about it.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Manjul, go ahead.
Yeah, in my case, like I said, we never thought about this documentary because it was a project funded by the AEIF, Alumni Engagement Innovation Fund of the Fulbright. And so then that was a project, a right-based intervention into the climate change discourses with a gender lens was the project. But once we started our journey, then we started realizing that it is important to process document it. What is it? How we are able to engage with the community and how the community is coming out with a counter map as a pedagogic material. So we, pull in this money, and I have to tell the name of the documentary makers also, because I was the project head of this particular section. And so they were also my friends and also international award-winning makers, documentary makers. And so actually we all came together, pull in our money, and that is how we made it. So because it is being used, so there is absolutely no fund from any other person. And we are showing, to most of the universities. Now the University of Toronto is interested to show it to their students. And then we have screened in most of the universities in Kerala. And so we actually interested to use it as a pedagogic material to initiate discussion among the women, among the community, among the students for a gender responsive climate change discourses and how the youth is looking and to be a part of our journey. That is what we are, because if we made a collective and we want the youth to be a part of this collective. So we actually made this complete finance from our own pocket. And I have to say my friends Bindu, Sajan and Abhijit who have done complete work without taking any penny, and Srijit who helped doing it. So they are all important makers. They are all doing voluntary work for this wonderful cause.
Again, thank you.
So the main funding for our film came from Fulbright. That is, that paid for my food and lodging, and then it paid for the work that the director did in doing the filming, Carlos Gomez. And he and I were in the field together for several months. And then, so most of the footage comes from that period. And at the same time, we were engaging on a related project, which had to do with creating an archive of women's oral tale telling, which is also well underway. And so we were filming for that as well. And then later on, the only additional money that went into the making of the film and paying for equipment and et cetera, and paying people came from the university that I work at, which is Bucknell University, from the president's office. So we went, once we had some footage, we went to him and said, look, we're doing this thing. And he, and I guess he was excited about it enough to help us get through the rest. As everybody here probably knows, it's very hard to get money to make documentaries unless you have a great track record of doing that already. But the conceiving of it, part of your question, Lauren, which I appreciate, what I knew was that I wanted to make a documentary, that Carlos and I were kind of ethically on the same page about what that would mean in terms of working with communities. And I knew he had the know-how both on the technical level and in terms of what it means on the ground to sit down with people and envision what we're going to make together. And so we brought really different skills to it. He hadn't spent time in South Asia or very much time in South Asia before. He didn't speak the language. So it was really complementary, what we were doing. And then the inclusion of Suman was incredibly important in terms of her vision into, as a sort of insider outsider. I know that's pretty old language at this point, but as somebody who's very familiar with the culture and the language, but also a sort of feminist, an Indian feminist outsider, her vision was part of this too. So really the three of us sat down a lot and just brainstormed and thought of what's the structure, what are the pieces we're trying to get across, how do you weave it together. And so, you know, and you hear all of our voices in it. Carlos was the main filmer. When you see Carlos in the film, I'm filming. So I had sort of another camera, and so we had footage to pull from that showed him as well. For instance, when we were kind of workshopping ideas and trying to get that down on paper and stuff. I mean, it sort of, so there was this sort of background notion, we want to do this thing in general, but how it came together was pretty organic in real time from our own ideas, and then the direction that people in the community wanted to take it also. So, for example, one thing that I wouldn't have done if the community members didn't want to do it is the way the story of Sama ends is with a wedding, and in my experience, having heard this story over and over again, I know that it doesn't usually end in a wedding. The moral of the story is that, and this is why we play Sama Chakiba, we do the festival every year. It's not, and then they got happily married and went off into the sunset, but that's the way the community wanted to do it. And, you know, they're influenced by all kinds of genres, media of storytelling.
Big Bollywood ending,
the
right?
big wedding is a big deal.
Bollywood ending.
Yeah, and so that's what it is, right? Yeah. But then you hear Suman's voice coming in and saying, "Is this really the end? Yeah. What happens next after they, you know, after they walk off together?" So, you know, there's another angle going on at the same time. Yeah, I guess that's enough of an answer.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to offer a quip. I'm 78. This is a new beginning. Thank you all.
Lovely.
Thank you, Lauren. Mrinalini, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, just really quickly. Corlin, your last statement made me wonder, is the fact that it was going to be on film because it was this, they associate that with like a Bollywood connection.
Yeah.
Is that why it had to have a happy ending? To, you know, it's traditional, folkloric, or
maybe. I mean, I can tell you that particularly the female participants were very excited about the costuming, and the jewelry and all of those things that had to do with wedding. And one of them was actually her role, somebody who wasn't in the film. No, she's in the film. She's not in the dramatization. But her role in the dramatization was as the costume person. And so she went and bought all of the things in the market and put together all of the
I have to say that
stuff.
the other thing I wanted to say about the reenactments is that I was actually surprised to find that Carlos is not Indian, because I feel like he uses the aesthetics of an Indian soap opera, the Sas Bahu serial, quite usefully here. It kind of gave that feel of the Indian soap opera, right?
Yeah.
And also,
Right.
I grew up watching televised versions of Ramayana and Mahabharata on Doordarshan, when we were children. And they have that similar feel to it. So for me, the visual language was very familiar, not something that took me out of it. To me, I just was instantly hooked into it, so.
So the part of the point here is that storytelling evolves and responds to what's going on in particular historical moments and what's available in terms of media. One thing, just as a sidebar that I'll say back to you, Harjant, in terms of Carlos, Carlos could be an urban Indian, right? He's a tall, kind of North Indian looking person in some ways. And almost everybody who didn't know who he was already approached him in Hindi because they just assumed he was an urban Indian. And he was always like,
I noticed Miriam unmuted herself. Actually, to me, I wanted to see if the filmmakers might have questions for each other about their films. So, or if Miriam wants to add anything to the conversation, welcome that as well. But I was wondering if the filmmakers have any questions about each other's works, perhaps.
I was actually listening in. I unmuted by mistake.
Okay. No worries. And then so we have 15 minutes left, and I welcome any questions that folks might have. Maybe we can take a couple of questions and then answer them together so that we're a little bit more efficient in our Q&A. I apologize. I tend to kind of talk sometimes. Do folks have any other? Yes, Lauren, go ahead.
Krishna, please comment on visualizing Krishna and giving the role that he played, both the actor, but the character as well. Any elaborations you would offer is brilliant.
Can I add to that question that Lauren has posed? I think one of the issues that all three of these films are dealing with is the issue of caste, right? And I appreciate your all the filmmakers' attentiveness to these issues of caste. And to me, it was quite interesting, Corlin, your choice to cast a Dalit artist or actor as Krishna, right? And Miriam, I think even in your film, caste and Dalit identity or Adivasi identity plays a very important role. And so, and also Manjula, I think I get the sense that these communities who are dealing with climate change and this kind of economic and environmental precarity are the folks who are the most oppressed, and the subaltern. So if you could talk a little bit about, how caste politics intersect with these kind of other political movements, right? If you could talk a little bit about that, I'd really appreciate it. And also why you chose to cast who you cast for Krishna. Yeah. So Corlin, if you want to take
you want me to go first?
Yeah.
Well, part of it is serendipity. Not every choice was fully thought out and planned out and theorized and all of that. But we already had gotten to know the Ranjan Paswan, who plays Krishna, and as an artist. He's a master artist of the what Harjan is calling the Madhavani art. Sometimes people call it Mithila art. And his whole family participates in that. His mother was a known painter, and his brother is a good painter too. But we wanted to play a little bit with cast in the casting, so to speak, of the characters if they were willing. And it wasn't like the the thing that we were deciding on. We were really interested in people's personalities and the degree of enthusiasm that they had. And Ranjan stepped up pretty readily and seemed interested. But it was very hard for him to become kingly. So he's fairly soft-spoken. He was playing, I'm sure he had the sense that he was playing over and against people who in their real lives were more powerful than him, more educated than him, higher caste than him. And so it took him a lot of practice to get a loud voice and be very commanding. And it was fun and funny, but he was pretty used to not being a king. And so to become kingly was a process. Of course, we painted him blue as Krishna shows up blue in so much of the iconography. That was fun too. And you could see it was sort of faded out and sweated off in some of the scenes.
And I also appreciated when people are like, well, he's had so many consorts, right? Like, why?
Yeah.
Daughter, right. Be in an affair. So I thought that
right.
was a great.
And then it was interesting that he said in his interview that he didn't approve that. Like a real king, a real sort of leader, kind of male leader should not be behaving such. It's very hard I think, not everybody's kind of prepared to criticize the divine,
Yeah.
So I don't really know how Krishna became a part of this story. A lot of folk stories have known deities in them, and but they're storylines that aren't the same as in the major epics and such. So I'm not real sure about that. I want to switch gears and then just say something short because I don't want to leave time. But the other figure, Tugala, was also a Dalit man, and he was our tuk-tuk driver. He was our tempo driver or whatever who took us all over the place, and he was fabulous and very prepared. Like he was theatrical anyway. He was ready to play the Tugala figure. And I was a little bit concerned that the bad guy would be this quite dark-skinned, clearly sort of villagey person. But he just was so into it. And he not only that, but he was really helpful in getting us set up in places and into places where we could shoot. And all of the places we shot were public spaces and we didn't have a crew. So just the people who were part of the whole thing were like trying to keep people on bicycles from bicycling through the scene or,
it had a very organic feel to it. Yeah.
And it kind of how to represent him was a little difficult because I didn't want people to make fun of him, and but he's funny, and so I hope he comes off kind of empathetic and that sort of thing. So that was just another cast related thing that we thought about.
Miriam, did you want to talk a little bit about these Adivasi communities and their sort of caste politics?
So, interestingly, the Adivasis do not subscribe to caste politics, and their pantheon is completely different from the Hindu pantheon in that sense. For instance, in the film, you see that they are worshipping the leopard, who is their god, or Vag Deva, as they call it, or trees are forms of nature worship are really what they follow. What is interesting and where the caste dynamics to some extent comes into the film is the way the city kind of imposes these brackets and wanting to understand where they position themselves when they don't position themselves as such, And I think the conflict really arises from the fact that even though they are the indigenous communities, they don't have any paperwork to prove who they are. And therefore, no paperwork to prove either any sort of caste affiliation nor claim over the land because it is theirs. That's where they've always existed. And this is where you see where the city officials are kind of coming in and asking them to prove who they are. And if they don't have that kind of paperwork or proof, they will be pushed into slum rehabilitation housing, which is really about low cost housing and, which kind of puts that wedge between them and their identity, which is really so interlinked with the land, the trees, the animals they worship, the practices, all of that. So I think it's this kind of forcing this conversation onto them, which is something that they don't subscribe to at all. And that's really where the conflict rises, which I tried to put that lensing on, that if they are who are already pushed to the fringes of their society, of our society, even though they are the original inhabitants, if they are pushed out from where they are, we in fact lose a battle, because even though they are at the forefront of this battle and they are in the front lines, they are fighting a collective battle for all of us to preserve a sort of sustainable way of living. And I also wanted to add very quickly that I fully agree with Manjula in the fact that even though we see within this whole caste line, there's further a division of gender lines. And even though that we are seeing women as sort of the front lines of the battle and the foot soldiers, we are just not seeing them in these important conversations about decision making. Whether it's about their land or, how development, so-called development, actually factors in sustainable sort of solution.
And this film works as a beautiful metaphor for sort of neoliberal India, and the kind of challenges of like neoliberalization in India, and then kind of rural communities trying to preserve their way of living. Manjula, please, if you want to add some thoughts to that.
Because in my documentary, it is a very interesting question, because we are trying to look, like the knowledge, power, and the feminization of the climate justice is what. And then the power that we are looking from the positionality of caste, class, and gender. And caste is a very, very important position here, because all are from the coastal community, Dalit community, and politics of caste is very important. So how we are trying to bring in the nexus between the caste and gender. So it is very, very important how the caste politics and the gender politics both feminizes the climate change discourses is something that we are trying to see. So it is very important to see how through that process we are able to bring a change, in that the whole discourse of development, and how it is important to look that. So here we are really trying to look at the decolonizing, like I said, how it is important to look at decolonization, and also the whole question of the past wrongs that is being done to the community, and then how whether there is a possibility of claiming the justice and able to facilitate them to claim their voices and spaces in this spaces where they have actually lost the spaces due to the encroachment, anthropogenic activities, and how then they are able to reclaim that spaces is something. So it is very, very important to understand the way in which the instrumental constitutive act of deep and passive social exclusion that is happening through the vertex of caste, class, and gender, and how to capture it is important to these collapses and divergences between, like Amartya Sen was saying about, there is an idea, then there is a practice, and and there is an institution. So how even the institutions, the state itself being part of this exclusionary practices, so the institutions become a part of this exclusionary practices, like they're saying about the policies are becoming a part of this. So where the caste is an important marker of absence, and how can we bring that politics of presence to this discourse is something that this documentary is trying to say, and how can we bring that. So it is very important to bring that spaces to the community to own their voices, to claim their voices. So that is something that we are trying, and their caste is an important marker.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we're almost out of time. Mrinalini, do we have time for another question, or are we supposed to wrap up now?
We can take one more question.
Okay, great. Does anyone have any last questions or comments? There's so much that these three filmmakers have given us to think about. I realized that somebody asked where could these films be seen, and the links I maybe perhaps share. So do people have any questions? Yeah, Lauren, go ahead.
I told you I had a dozen questions if you were listening.
Yeah, some questions here, like some.
No, I'm just a voice.
Box.
I'm audio
Sorry.
only. I can see you. Two quick questions. These films, as I said before, were quite extraordinary, had quite an impact on me. I felt the humanity in particular, not just because I was a Fulbrighter there in 1968 and 69, but I've known many Indian folks since then here in the United States. My question, two-part. One, do you have a second film in mind, a sequel, maybe on a totally different film? Subject, that is. And number two, our moderator Harjant, is that the way you say your name? Use the phrase neoliberalism. Take that phrase out. How much modernization have you witnessed over the last 10 or 20 years in society, in social norms? Full stop.
Great. And before folks answer this question, and I think I just want to also say that neoliberalism is not just about modernization. It's also about the sort of dispossession of people from their land and their properties, and for the purposes of transnational capitalism to thrive. But before we do that, I recognize that Zoe posted, I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Zoe posted a question from Manjula. Can you talk more about community mapping in your research process? Did you have some sort of GIS mapping system to visualize this and impact your questions or theories about that data? So if you could answer that question briefly, and then maybe we can answer the question about your next project and about modernization, neoliberalism, however you want to take it. And I ask that please keep your answers brief because we don't have a ton of time. So the next panel is going to start at 2:00. My turn.
Thank you. So the participatory resource, but the resource mapping that we are saying, we use the participatory resource mapping methodology through the historical mapping, speaking with the community, facilitating the community to do. We didn't use the GIS because the moment we are using, we are thinking that, okay, somewhere it has not been accessible to the community. So it is the lived experiences, everyday experiences of the community. And then we train them to do this mapping through the PRA methods, like I'm saying about historical data, co-web analysis, problem tree analysis. And so we use at least 6 methods of PRA methods, and we train the community to do that. And then that become a counter spatial data, counter historical data, counter temporal data. And so this is how we have trained them, and we have actually trained them 6 months, both online and offline, with a group of experts who are working with them and training the community to make that. And then if you're seeing the documentary, you can very well see that is there in the documentary itself. What are the maps that they've made, and how the communities and then the elected representatives are using that maps now to plan the cadastral mapping of the area. That is my thing brief.
Your next project, if you can just maybe take the answer for the next question.
Yeah, we are doing something, like right now in Maharashtra, because I'm working in Mumbai. So we are trying to do working with an indigenous community right now, and trying to do the SDG framework, and we are taking one step ahead with this, and how can we work with the SDG and the localization of that, where we are using the SDG of 5, 11, and 13, where the climate change is again one. So how can we work with the community to make that localization of the sustainable development goal, and how can they bring into the local governance institutions framework, So basically to make the data locally available and the demand-driven data, and through the micro level planning. So we are actually training the community to the micro level planning and to make the Gram Panchayat Development Report, that is a GPDP, which is a mandatory requirement of all the local governance institutions in Kerala. So we are working with the community to produce that. So basically, we are trying to make the knowledge, that is epistemology, subverting that patriarchal knowledge, subverting the colonial knowledge, subverting the technocratic knowledge to community-driven knowledge, which is subversive, and to go for an epistemic justice. Yeah.
Thank you, Manjula. Miriam, did you want to talk about your next projects on horizons?
Yeah, so right now I'm currently on my Fulbright in UT Austin, and my area of research is looking at women in cinema, visibilizing their role and also forms of collectivism that have come up. And I've been doing like 3-4 years of research into it. It will end up in a manuscript of a book. I also have like these hidden history chapters of early cinema where the contributions of women have been forgotten and almost erased, when in fact they were entrepreneurs who actually gave birth to the industry in many ways. So I would like to I'm working those into sort of an episodic series. In terms of my current work with this particular film, it's really traveling within the festival circuits as well as the educational circuits. And I'm working to co-produce another filmmaker from Kerala whose subject actually quite overlaps with what Manjula has done with coastal communities. So that's a film I'm working on.
I hope you two can collaborate since you both
it's been brilliant
in Bombay.
It's brilliant to meet you.
Corlin, what do you have cooking up in the future?
Well, I'm pleased to say that Sama in the Forest just got accepted for the Rye Film Festival,
and also distributed by documentary. Also distributed by DER, which is the premier documentary educational distributors. I have to make that plug because
that was good. That was good. I also put the availability of the film through DER in the chat. People wondering where to find it. The kind of the next thing that Carlos and I are working on is a kind of we call it teaching tools, different ways to use the film, and also other material that didn't make it into the film. And we're kind of creating modules around different subjects and disciplines so that there are ways to use it both in formal educational settings, but also in community settings. And so we're like right in the middle of that. And I'm hoping to work on that more this summer. But also I'd really like to get the film, have some opportunities to use the film in community-based organizations in India and Nepal to create conversations about what's going on in people's own communities around some of these shifts that are happening, or shifts they'd like to see, or shifts they'd like to not see. So I'm kind of investigating with some colleagues in India about where it might make sense to use it and see if folks are interested there. So I got to get back to India.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to take a moment to thank all three of our panelists, Corlin, Miriam, and Manjula, for sharing their work, their films, their time with us, their knowledge. I feel like all three of these films exemplify collaborative community filmmaking, but not just that, they also do the work of decolonizing and rethinking epistemologies, and particularly at a time of global uncertainty and precarity and just worlds going crazy. I think these three films remind us that we can actually turn to our communities locally and and create a sense of movement and empowerment, at a time when you sort of feel so disempowered by the the big global forces, you know, you can turn to art, you can turn to your community, you can turn to your own people to be able to create a sense of solidarity. And I think to me, these films are a great example of how those localized solidarity movements are still so important, right? And they're actually the ones that are going to do the job of like confronting global inequities. And so, thank you so much for sharing these films. They're all three of them are are exemplary. So, and I'm going to turn it over to Ronalini if you have any closing thoughts. And
You said it beautifully. Thank you, Harjan, for moderating today. You did an excellent job. And we have, for those of you who will be joining us for our next panel, hopefully most of you, I realize it's later in India, so that might be asking a lot. But we should be back on in another 20 minutes. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.